Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, it's September and I turned a new leaf. I've been trying the Simply Snackin' chicken flavors. I really enjoyed the black bean and chicken, and also the chicken and cherries. So, stepping out a little bit, trying new stuff. They have tons of great flavors, beef and chicken. And so try chicken this month if you haven't tried it yet. I think you'll be impressed. I really liked it. And I thank them for sponsoring the Symposium for Metabolic Health and also for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. So go and eat some good stuff. Enjoy your day. And thank you again for listening. Hey, everyone. This is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or, medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice, because we can't pay our bills with that, but we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you. Hello, and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. I have a great one today. I'm really excited about someone that I finally crossed paths with. I've heard so much about her through Tony Hampton and some other people out there. And then, so Ede Fox, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And it was, it really was a delight to get to talk to you at San Diego. And I've heard a lot about you. So, a lot of people really love your stuff as well. And I was really excited to get to talk to you.
Yeah, you get stuck at my dinner table, so you're like a hostage there. But it was really great. We got to talk about a lot of fun stuff, and I just love your spirit of wanting to learn more and wanting to help people. And it's so important because sometimes we get so caught up in arrogance and we know all the answers and we don't want to hear what other people have to say. And that's why I love those conferences, that we could all get together and kind of brainstorm and pick each other's brain, see what's working and what's not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I actually learned so much. I mean, I'm going back through the talks because hearing the things the first time, like I had a lot of, like sparks going off, like, oh, these are things that I want to pursue. But now having time to really sit down and focus and pay attention and incorporate some of what I learned, definitely there were some major shifts in the way I was thinking. So I'm excited about that.
So for people who don't know you, tell them your story, like your background, how you got to be the Black Carnivore. How did that happen? How did you transform yourself? And what was your health like before, and what brought you to the place you're at now?
Yeah, so I just started my keto journey in 2015. And it kind of, I mean, I had done keto before, or Atkins as I had called it, in the 90s. I had when the fourth Atkins book had come out, I was in LA and, everybody was doing it. So I did it too. And, it was effective and, I enjoyed it, but I didn't think of that as something that you could do long term. And so in 2015, I actually was, trying to lose weight. And I went to, I was just doing the regular calorie restriction and whatnot. And I switched over to keto and just started counting my carbs. And I was just amazed at how quickly I started to feel better. So even before I lost much weight, I lost the aches and pains and just the fatigue, the brain fog, all of that stuff was resolving really quickly. And that's what made me so excited to try to figure out why was that happening? Why was this so effective for so many other things? And that's what sent me down the rabbit hole of looking for videos, watching scientific presentations. And back in 2015, there was not a lot of information, it wasn't, there weren't a whole lot of influencers and stuff. And so you know, I was really just watching, you know, these presentations from conferences and trying to incorporate what I learned, and you know, testing what worked for me, what didn't work for me, and you know, and I kind of just went from there. And so a lot of things got better for me. Um, but I didn't, there were things that still weren't resolved, and that I heard other people saying, oh my God, I went keto and like all my allergies went away, but mine did not. And they were like continuing to get worse and worse. And so I started experimenting with carnivore in December of 2017. And right up to and right around that point, December and January of 2018, my asthma was at its all-time worst. And in fact, I had a whole bunch of health conditions that I guess more or less, you know, exploded or got their worst together. So I really felt horrible. And and then I tried carnivore in the midst of all that, and that gave me so much more life and energy. And you know, I actually have never really told the story in this way, and recently was talking to my father, and like told him all of my health things. I didn't grow up with him, but since my mom passed and the pandemic, you know, I've gotten much closer to my father's side of the family, and now you know, we talk a lot and regularly. And so I don't think he knew my whole health history, and he's very much a vegetarian, and you know, thinks what I'm doing is crazy, but has kind of held his tongue. But we had this like 2 hour long conversation, and I told him all the things, and then he was like, okay, I now understand why you do what you do. Not sure I agree, but I understand where you're coming from. But basically, you know, I guess I have a lot of inflammatory conditions. So I always struggled with asthma, eczema, and allergies. And those were just getting worse and worse. And the summer of 2017, I know I'm getting like all over the place, so sorry
No, I
about
love it.
that.
I love it because, you know, you're making so many good points. So you just can continue to roll.
Okay. So the summer of 2017, I was running for public office in Brooklyn. You know, in my other life, I was, you know, I worked in for local government, and I ran for office twice, and I didn't win, but you know, I did very well, and it was, you know, an amazing experience. But you know, that summer, I stuck to keto, you know, flawlessly, never had a cheat, never anything, but still I had a lot of breathing problems. And then simultaneously with that, I have endometriosis, and that condition was getting worse and worse and worse. And I became, there's a word for it. I mean, there's like heavy bleeding that lasts a long time, right? And so that was happening. And so by December, I was severely anemic. I didn't know it, but I had gone to a different doctor about, you know, my other condition, which is epilepsy. And you know, and I had a blood, you know, panel drawn, and he called me and was like, "Where are you? Are you standing up? Are you okay? Can you get to an emergency room?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "You're so anemic. What is happening? Why are you so anemic?" And I was
Wow.
like, "Oh." And at the same time, my allergy, you know, I guess my allergies were really bad, so I was having really bad asthma. So simultaneously, I didn't have enough blood cells, you know, to take the oxygen around, and I couldn't breathe to get oxygen in. So like I couldn't run up the subway stairs. I would get dizzy and feel like I was going to pass out. It was really hard for me to like walk up the subway. And so I just thought I was getting out of shape, like, you know, because I had been a person who worked out a lot, and then in the campaign I didn't exercise at all, but I was, you know, doing a lot of walking around and climbing flights of stairs as I was doing door knocking and stuff. And I just thought I was getting out of shape. But when he said that, it was like kind of like, oh, I get it now. And then I ended up in urgent care because I woke up, you know, there were a couple of nights where I just could not breathe. And I just had to sit up all night, you know, arms up, and just try to, you know, draw each breath in and count down the minutes till urgent care opened up. And then I got there, and they were like, oh my God, how did you get here? And it's like, oh God, this is really bad. If people in urgent care are worried, you know, or like,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like, oh, this is bad. So they had to put me on a nebulizer for 10 minutes just so they could hear me breathe, because I couldn't breathe well enough for them to listen. So, they were like, I think you have allergy-induced asthma. You need to go to a pulmonologist. Here's some prednisone and some Advair and some Singulair and, all the steroids. Let's just give you that right now. So, I took all of that. And it was like a period of like 2 weeks where it took, that stuff like took a while, I guess, to kick in. And so I ended up in urgent care twice. Finally went to the pulmonologist. They said, yes, you have allergy-induced asthma. So, basically this is just all autoimmune stuff. And plus, my allergies, before I went carnivore, I was taking Singulair, Claritin and Benadryl around the clock, Flonase, which I didn't know at the time was a steroid, buying tons of tissues. So, it's just, that was it. So anyway, this all culminated in that time frame. And then I decided, I'd seen something about a beef and butter fast, where you eat ground beef crumbles and butter for 3 days. So I decided to do it. And, and that was just about like losing weight. I wasn't thinking anything about any of these other health conditions. So I did it day one. On day two, I mean, all of a sudden, I felt like I could breathe. I had so much energy. I felt so awake. And it was like all this stuff switched off. And so I ended up continuing to do it for like 3 weeks because I felt amazing. And I knew at that moment, though, that this was going to be home base. I could eat a lot of other things. I would cheat. I knew that those things would happen. But I always knew this is what I was going to come back to. Now, what I didn't know, and I don't know if this is, this is relevant for a lot of people, I think, is that dairy was a big part of the problem for me. So on carnivore, I went back to eating dairy because people ate dairy and, cheese is an animal product and blah, 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 and everyone loves cheese. And I resisted taking it out because when I was on keto, well, let's see. So before keto, I guess I had always considered myself lactose intolerant. I always hated milk, didn't like ice cream, didn't like anything from, milk except for cheese. And even then it was like a modest amount of cheese and my stomach, could not always handle it. But then when I went keto, I imagine my gut lining must have healed enough that cheese became, a possibility. And so I ate more and more of it. So all through my keto journey, I had at least an ounce or two of cheese every day, and some days a lot more. And now looking back, the summer that I was running that campaign, I was eating a lot of cheese. And now I see like that was probably what was driving the endometriosis and driving, all of the asthma and the allergies and all of that and the eczema. So finally, in the early days, when I started carnivore, I mean, I feel like, there were carnivore veterans who'd been doing it 10 or 15 years, and they were, they're kind of strict about how they approach this stuff. And I appreciate it. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. So they were always like, you have to take out dairy. You can't like guess, imagine, judge from somebody else's experiences. You have to take it out and test it. And every single thing you have to test for yourself because everybody's body is a little different. And so finally I was like, okay, I'm going to test this dairy. So I took it out, and the first, 1 or 2 meals, it was like, oh man, I got to eat this burger with no cheese. I got to eat this thing with no cheese. But, by the third meal, it was like, why was I all concerned about cheese? And then about 10 days later, I was out with my mom. I was hungry. She had some of those cheese wisps in her car. And so I had some, and I had like half a serving, not even a lot. And it was like within an hour, I needed my asthma inhaler. And then I realized I hadn't used my asthma inhaler for, weeks, or for the previous 10 days. And I hadn't even thought about it. And I was like, oh man, this is not good.
Yeah, it's amazing. I had a friend, the same thing, severe asthma, eczema, and he gave up dairy. He was going surfing one day, and this old lady on the bus said, "Hey, you're wheezing." She heard him wheezing and said, "Stop drinking milk. That's your problem." He laughed like, "This lady's crazy." And then like 10 years later, he said, maybe I'll stop. So some people are really sensitive to that, and you maybe one. The other confounder that you had running for office is stress. Stress affects the gut microbiome and the stress hormones and all that stuff. So some people, that will set them up for misery. And the other thing that looks at the gut microbiome too is Dr. Salcedo talked about it, with endometriosis and the connections with the gut microbiome. So it is really interesting to see how all these things change, and changing your diet may have really impacted that too, of
Mhm.
getting your gut healthier.
Well, it's funny you say that. Now, as you say that, I think every campaign that I've worked on, I've been like the campaign director or, head of volunteer or whatever. I've worked on a gazillion campaigns for years, and every single one of them, as soon as the campaign is over, I get some weird sickness or illness that, is hard to, takes like weeks to recover from. And I just kind of started scheduling in that time, knowing that however, whatever the campaign was, I was going to need about 6 weeks afterwards of like intense rest. But now this is probably my body's stress response and the impact on my gut.
Yeah, and we all did that too. In med school after finals, you study so hard and you're up all night and you're studying and you're working so hard and stressed. And then right after that, it'll be Christmas break and you're sick. Like, seriously, I'm sick when I get a break finally. But
Mhm.
it's when your body lets up a little bit. So a lot of us who've been through a lot of life stress, we realize at the tail end of that, you end up getting sick a lot of times.
Yeah, and it was always weird stuff too. Like one year I got vertigo and I, was trying to go to like doctors, and one guy was like, maybe you have TMJ, an ENT said that. And I was like, what? Grind my teeth? Like what? I don't know.
Yeah, stress induced also, a lot of that, when you're sleeping at night and you're stressed and tense, and we don't realize enough how much that really impacts us. And then so you changed. So who was your big influencer, like, to think about carnivore? Was it someone like Sean Baker or something like that, or was there someone that you were kind of following, or you just said, I'm gonna try this butter and meat and see what happens?
Well, I'd actually heard of it years and years before. So Charles Washington had a message board back in like the early 2000s. So I had come across it then. And I've always been like trying to control my weight and also eat in ways that I thought were healthy. Like it was an important value of mine to eat healthy and to do what I could to preserve my health. And so to that end, I was always like looking at different message boards, and I had done what I guess what I would call like low carb for years on and off. And at the time, like I wasn't super strict about it, but it was just kind of like eat salads with chicken, eat broccoli with turkey, and then have a bunch of wine and beer, and that's like my low carb. So sometimes I was in ketosis, sometimes I wasn't. But I was always like sort of on the message boards and watching the different things that people were doing and talking about. And so I came across that, and as an extension of a low carb lifestyle where you're doing zero carb. And I thought it was crazy, but I joined the boards. I was on for about 6 months reading it. I didn't comment or anything like that, but I was like reading. And then finally I just decided this is crazy. Like you have to have your kale and your broccoli and your garlic and your carrots and all of these like health products, and I didn't feel like I could just let that go. So I like just quit that. And then but it was always sort of in the back of my head. And then I would hear from time to time Amber O'Hearn do these talks and talk about carnivore and what it did for her. And I don't know, she always struck me as like a very very smart and logical person. And so just the way she talks and she, her interests and stuff. And so I don't know, I was kind of like, if a person who seems to be very measured and smart finds value in this, there might be something that I'm overlooking. So I continued to listen, and then I came across that fast, and I was like, well, I always talk about how my vegetables are so minimal, and at towards the end of my keto journey, I was like saving my carbs for chocolate, wine, and nuts, which is not I don't, for those of you watching or listening, I do not recommend that. It's not a good approach. So I finally decided, let me just go ahead and go all the way, because she would always say there is a difference between doing very little vegetables and no vegetables. So I went all the way, and it was like, and I couldn't believe, like, in a day, 24 hours was all it took for me to suddenly feel like I could breathe. And I think what happened was, all that inflammation went down, so I could actually breathe. and I ate, a bunch of iron, and, I mean, you can't reverse anemia overnight, but I think, that boost that helped. And so I just felt amazing in the midst of, a pretty bad health crisis for me.
Have you ever considered re-adding those things back in, or you say, I'm feeling so good, I don't want to mess with it?
I don't enjoy it. I mean, once I let go of the idea that you need vegetables to be healthy, there's why am I eating them? In terms of the taste, I recognize that, what I really missed was the sauces and stuff that go on top of those things. So whether it's butter or with salad dressing, it's sugar, really. My favorite salad dressing was like balsamic vinaigrette, which is just, sugar mixed with some oil. So once you take those things out, like the actual vegetable itself, I don't enjoy those things. So, then I was like, well, I don't need to take that back. I mean, the things that I was like missing were, donuts and brownies and cookies
Of
and
course, yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of thing.
Well, and I
So
think that may be part of the benefit too to the carnivore approach is that you take all those out of the equation. Even if you're having the low carb versions, we've all seen it where people go low carb and they go, okay, I'm having my low carb brownies, my low carb donut, my low carb bagel, my low carb, and it will all adds up over time. So if you're carnivore, it kind of takes all those things out of the equation.
yeah, absolutely. So
So how did you transition from being, okay, I'm just reading the message boards to being a big time leader in there now? What
well,
made you step up?
yeah. Well, it began or even before during my keto journey, because as I was losing weight, on keto starting in 2015, uh, back then, I don't know if you all know, and now it feels like keto is just ubiquitous and everybody is kind of aware of it, and people have a general, I mean, not in the media, but in the general population, people are like, oh, okay, yeah, keto. But back then, talking about being paleo or being low carb, you got a lot of flack for it. People really thought it was crazy. So I didn't tell people, I kind of hid it. And, but over time, I started losing weight and I ended up losing 80 pounds. And, you know, people started at about the 25-pound mark, people would be like, oh, hey, today you look great today. By 50 pounds, people would be like looking at me and kind of, I could see them like looking down at my body and looking back up. And I worked in government. We had tons of training about like sexual harassment and all of that. So
Yeah.
people were very careful not to say or anything. But by the time I hit 80 pounds, people were just openly staring at my body and they're like, what did you do? How I need to lose weight. Like, help me. What did you do? And I'm like, are you really sure you want to do this? And they'd be like, yes, I'll do anything. And I'm like, well, you have to not eat bread or carbs or any of that. And they were like, oh no, I can't do that. But so many people asked me that I started to, kind of think about how I would share this information. And I ended up with a friend of mine, and she came to me and was like, oh, I want to, lose weight. You did such a great job. I'm going vegan, and I'm on this thing with my husband, and we're just the family. We're going to be vegan. And I was like, mm. And I said, well, when you're done with that, come back to me and we'll talk about how you can lose weight. So a few weeks later, she's like, yeah, that didn't work.
Well, it's funny,
So
Ken Berry and I had that same conversation. A lot of people, they do it and they try and it's diligent. And really, I mean, if you're cutting out the processed foods and then you figure out you're going to have some benefit, at least initially. And then you go, okay, after a while, it's like, this is hard. It's really challenging. Like you were at the talk with the vegan talking about how to get enough protein on the vegan diet. You're like, holy cow, that's really like most of us are too lazy to be that complicated. It's like you have to add 3 lentils, 5 of this, 2 of that. And you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have time for that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, well, in my God, I want to go in two different directions. So in my former life before public service, I was getting a PhD in anthropology. So I've always been interested in other cultures, how they eat, and in human evolution. So I do feel like there's a lot of indigenous knowledge about how to pair these foods and how to construct a healthy diet, but that knowledge has not really made its way through general society in Western culture. So I think that pairing that you're talking about does happen in a lot of places, but it is also part of the general culture, and that information is passed on generation through generation. So it's really it's bad for us that we don't have that many of us don't have that connection to indigenous knowledge about food and health. But what I was going to say is that my friend, when she finally decided to come back and try keto, we ended up making a podcast called Black Keto, which is still out there. There's only a few episodes, but we really wanted to speak to the Black community and bring this way of eating. And I, and it like at the time, keto was, people were just starting to use that word, and it was still very taboo. And so, it was hard to talk about it with people without them kind of just being like, oh, that's crazy, that's not for me. So we were trying to make the show that would be fun and lighthearted and interesting for people, and at the same time they learn something. But meanwhile, while we're doing the show, I'm already carnivore at that point, so it was just kind of funny. Yeah, but I wasn't telling people because it seemed crazy, and I wasn't ready to come to come out and publicly talk about it. So I was still telling my mom and people close to me and my boyfriend at the time that I was doing this experiment. And actually that boyfriend was like, it's been like 8 months, like when is this experiment over? And I was like never.
When it stops working. Yeah, when it stops working, it'll be over, right? Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's amazing. And so it's fun with your dad, like being total opposite of the spectrum. Have either of you come around to what the other one's doing, or you kind of just say, hey, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, and they started me out as a vegetarian because when my parents were together, the family was vegetarian. So I hear stories about how, he would take me to family reunions and I'd be running after the kids with the hot dogs, trying to get bites of their hot dogs. So even as a very young child, I knew I needed and wanted beef. And that was all I ever wanted to choose. If I went out anywhere or had the ability to choose what I was going to eat, it was without question going to be beef. So that, I clearly my body had an issue from the very beginning. And then later on, my mom told me that I used to get ear infections a lot. I think this was before the age of 2 or 3. And it didn't really happen much after that, but I must have taken a lot of antibiotics. And then when I was born, actually, the doctors told her not to give me formula because I was allergic to soy. And I was like, how would they even know on day 1 of my life that I'm allergic to soy? And back then in the 70s, they didn't, talk about allergies. Like that wasn't really a thing yet. So I'm like, my reaction must have been terrible for them to say, hey, by the way, this is a real concern. Do not give this child soy. And of course, I mean, my mom did breastfeed me, but she never told me that information. So years later, I've gone to functional doctors. They finally told me I was allergic to soy and corn, which is in everything. So it's impossible, without going carnivore, to really cut those things out of your diet. And then years later, she was like, oh yeah, the doctors told me when you were born that you were allergic to soy. And I was like, how could you not share this information
Yeah,
with
how
me?
would they
This is
know that? You're right. It's like, how do you know? They may have just seen enough kids who couldn't tolerate soy and go, just don't do soy, But it's
Yeah.
really interesting how we go through so many doctors and try to figure out so much stuff, and no one sits back and says, wait, let's look at this whole thing, because asthma, allergies, a lot of the stuff you have go together, and we see them all the time. You go, why does this person have such a problem? And because when we were kids back in the day, even though I'm a little bit older than you, it's we'd never had peanut allergy. It was never an issue at all. Now all of a sudden all these kids have peanut allergies, they're allergic to this and gluten, and it's like, wow, we never knew any of that stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. And actually with epilepsy, recently I started just kind of searching to see if there were any studies connecting epilepsy to the gut microbiome. And yes, there are a lot. So I have learned that, that too is actually a gut, there's a real tie to the gut. And so I don't know, like I feel like I thought that I had done a lot of healing with my gut during keto and then doing carnivore. And, I probably have, but things are probably a lot more problematic than I imagined them to be. And so these conditions that I always thought of as sort of separate things are really actually quite closely tied. So I'm now, kind of thinking about that, and then thinking about how those things are tied to stress, and then, what to do now going forward.
Yeah, and you think about when we look for seizure disorder, we do a sleep deprived EEG, because when you're sleep deprived, it changes those brain waves too. So, and the stress hormones and all these other things change. And so what's happened with your seizure disorder going carnivore from keto? Was there a difference between the two?
So I don't know. My seizures started when I was in my early 20s, and and it was just sort of random. That and the doctors were like, "That's weird. You're kind of old for this to just start, and you're not doing drugs. Like, what's this about?" So I don't know. So over the first like 10 years, I took I was on medication, and they told me, go for 2 years on the medication, then you can try getting off and see what happens. And so I did that 3 times, and I'd be able to be off medication for, 1.5, 2 years, but then I would have a seizure again, which, again, always coincided with, some stressful moment in life. And my seizures always happened as I was falling asleep or in sleep. So, the doctors were like, make sure you get enough sleep, don't drink alcohol, and whatever. And inevitably at some point in time I would not get enough sleep and not have alcohol and have stress, and all of these things sort of culminated. So I ended up, the last time I had a seizure, I think, was in my early 30s, and then I went back on the medication and I didn't come off of it again. So I've been on it continuously until now. And then this year, I talked to my neurologist. We did a 24-hour EEG, and I didn't have any seizure activity, or I guess there's like different things that can happen that give signs that, that kind of thing can happen. And so, for over a 24-hour period, there wasn't any of that kind of activity. So he was like, this of course is not, you can't predict, but, this would suggest that you could get off the medication and be seizure free. So I didn't, that was earlier this year, and now I've just decided to try getting off the medication. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, it's scary. That's a scary thing because, there's so much at
Mhm.
stake, losing your license and all that crazy stuff. But, also, we don't know. I think there's so much we don't know. And historically, they've done a high fat ketogenic diet for seizure disorder. It's like, did it have to be that? Would carnivore work? I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question, because I really don't know if it's taking away something bad, or whether the ketones are doing something, or whether, because I know they've done studies with exogenous ketones that weren't very helpful. So it's maybe not, and it maybe that has to be the endogenous ketones that you make possibly too. So yeah, it's just really an interesting area of medicine. I think we're going to learn a lot more over time. And having people like you who are saying, okay, let me try and see how I'm doing as I get older and kind of taper things down. But we've seen we've heard some great stories about people changing their diet and having an influence on that. And when I was going through my mold allergy thing, we were trying to figure it out, and we couldn't figure out what the heck, and it turned out not to be a food allergy at all. But the allergist, I said, look, what do I do? He laughed. He said, well, you could go carnivore and see what happens. And this is before carnivore was even like talked about, because he said a meat diet, he probably didn't even say carnivore. He just said you could eat just meat and see what happens, because a lot of these things go away when people just eat that. So we observe that and we see it, and people don't realize how much food sensitivity there is out there.
Hmm. I agree. And, people are always asking me, oh, I want to do carnivore, but I want to have a little of this and a little of that and a little of this. And it's kind of like, I actually did a live stream last night where I really talked about it, and it was interesting. I noticed that when the more strict I am, the better I feel. And, so like beef, salt, water, feel amazing. The more little things I add in and variety, even when they're still carnivore, not, I still feel like 96%, but I don't feel 99% or 100%. So there is a difference. But I feel like I tell people, it's up to you how you want to feel. So if you are okay with feeling a little less good, then, that's on you. But, when people are always asking me, like, why aren't you trying raw dairy? And maybe you can reintroduce dairy now. And have you healed enough? And I'm like, you were not with me at, 4 in the morning when I could not breathe. that experience I will never forget. And so I don't have a desire to ever experience anything like that again. So, so no, I'm not going to try dairy. It is not important enough for me to eat cheese. I need to breathe. But for other people, maybe that is okay. It's really for you to decide for yourself. And if you only get a little postnasal drip when you eat dairy, then maybe that's fine.
Yeah, I think, one of my patients, she's done really well. And she says, I always ask myself, is it worth it? So in your case, you could look and say, is it worth it if I start wheezing at 2 a.m? No, it's not worth it to try it again. So not worth it,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
eating these terrible cookies that aren't even that good. But if grandma made cookies, maybe it's worth it at that point, right? So,
Hmm.
I think it's with those things in life, we have to kind of look at that and say, okay, this is what doesn't work for me. This is what works for you. That's fine. Like some people can, have one cookie and they're fine. Other people have one cookie and they're off the rails for 6 months, and so sometimes being
Yes.
really strict, even though it sounds so crazy, it's the way to go. Abstinence, and
Mhm.
if you have one drink and you can't stop, then you don't have the first drink and then you do fine. And other people can say, yeah, I have one drink every month and I'm fine and that's it. And I, draw the boundary at that and that works for them. Okay. But in your case, with all the health stuff you've had, I get it. And you go, I don't want to feel bad. And the sad part is a lot of people are feeling bad, like how you felt before, and they're not willing to make that change. And they're just going
Hmm.
to suffer and take a lot of drugs the rest of their life.
Well, and the thing that one of the things that I think carnivore really shines at too is the improvement in mental health. I had no expectation about any of that, but what I found early on was that I finally came to a place where every single day I just felt good. Like my level of normal just elevated so much. And I would think, man, like there's no pain. I don't feel sad. I don't feel like so emotionally all over the place. And I feel very focused. And that was new to me. And I think a lot of times when I'm talking to people, they're basically in the midst of like, I mean, they're high on sugar. And so you can't like have a conversation with a drunk person about like getting off of alcohol. Like you can't have any kind of logical conversation. And so I feel like a lot of times when people are like, oh no, I can't, or can I have a little of this? Can I have a little of that? I'm essentially talking to a drunk person about alcohol. And so this is actually why I decided to do my 5-day carnivore challenge, because I feel like even 5 days off of this stuff gives you a little taste of how amazing you can feel. And so if I can just get people to do 5 days and be really strict for 5 days, they will start to get sober. And then it's up to them to decide whether, what they want to do with that information. But it is powerful information to have. And so when I, got food sober, I guess you would call it, it was just kind of like, wow, as great as keto made me feel, carnivore made me feel so much better. And it's like my head came through the clouds and it's like, wow, there's a whole other world out here that I did not
Wow.
see or feel before. And and that's an amazing feeling. And so, I just want other people to feel that, because I hate to see people suffer. And suffer needlessly. And yeah.
Yeah, and that was, it's funny. I don't know if you saw the movie Fat Fiction, but it was a movie they did with a bunch of my patients. And there was a scene when they were interviewing them all at my church, actually. And, one of the ladies said, you know what? It was like, just like what you said, it was like I stepped out of fog my whole life. I was depressed and anxious. She goes, yeah, I lost 48 pounds. I came off all my diabetes meds, my blood pressure normalized, but the mood effects. And the guy next to her started crying. He said, me too, same thing. And then all of them, 5 of them, all of them said, oh my gosh, my mood got better. But they cut it out of the movie because it was probably too controversial at the time. But it was
Hmm.
true. That was their experience. And so I don't know why I didn't make the movie, because it was a really emotional moment to say, wow, because when you feel better and you interact with people, your relationships get better, your sleep gets, everything is better. So it's that emotional part you're talking about is a huge deal. And you say, well, why would I go back to eating stuff that made me emotionally unstable? It doesn't
Hmm.
make sense. And people just
Hmm.
can't grasp that concept. It's that mental part of it is really hard. They can understand losing weight, they can understand getting your sugars better by not eating sugar, but the emotional aspects of saying, I feel happy today. I feel like going out and talking to my neighbors and things like that. That's a huge benefit. And just think in society what that means, right? In the Black community, think what that means is when you get people who are healthier and more stable and making better decisions in life, and in all communities, but really being able to reach communities that are really hurting. And one of the things that I would ask you is, a lot of people will say, well, carnivore's too expensive and people can't afford to do that if they're on a budget. What kind of advice would you give people who are on a budget trying to figure out how to eat better?
I don't think it's more expensive. And I mean, of course, if you're like going to eat, aged ribeyes every day, yes, that's expensive. So yeah, you can't do
Yeah,
that.
only Sean Baker can do that.
I don't know. But I think that, when I think about it, if a pound of ground beef costs, I don't know, $4.99, and I eat 2 pounds in a day, we're talking about $10. But when I was trying to eat, my all the colors of the rainbow for, the vegetables, having, 5 to 7 servings of fruit and vegetables a day. I mean, vegetables are expensive. So broccoli costs the same amount per pound, but I cannot eat just 2 pounds of broccoli in a day and, and expect to feel any level of comfort. So if you're trying to eat, healthy, that's like way more expensive than, eating carnivore. And then, of course, there's like lots of dry things like, rice and beans, which are cheaper, but there's a lot of work that goes into preparing that. And also, you don't feel great. So, and I think back, at one point I did a post on Instagram where I took a picture of like my medicine cabinet shelf, with all of my Benadryl and all of the medications that I used to take. And there were a ton. And I had put them onto an upper shelf at some point because I wasn't really using them and didn't think about it. And then when I was cleaning out my cabinet, I realized that I hadn't gone to this shelf for 2 years, not for the Advil, for the Tylenol, for Benadryl, for anything. And all of these things had expired. And I was like, man, I think about how much money and like Mucinex, that was something I used all the time. And Mucinex is expensive. So, and Flonase also very expensive.
Afrin,
So
all those things are expensive. Heartburn
yeah.
medicine. There's a lot of people on tons of meds, and they're not factoring that in. And then they're also not factoring in that $5 coffee they're having every morning too, right? You're eating for $8 or $10 a day, and their coffee is already taking up half that budget.
Well, I mean, even without those things, for me, just adding up the over-the-counter medications and the tissues, and the lipstick that I would wipe off every time I do my nose,
Well, the urgent care
and
visits and the
reapply. Yes,
doctor's visits and ER visits, all that stuff.
right. So when you add that up together, it is way cheaper to be carnivore. So I do encourage people, don't just think about like the moment you're walking into the grocery store, think, more broadly. And then all the snacking you don't do, the M&Ms and the chips and the other things that you're not buying, that stuff, it adds up quite quickly. So when I'm, doing a stretch of beef, salt, and water, I'm kind of like, wow, where's all this money coming from? I'm not buying anything else.
Yeah, and
Where
plus the simplicity of that, right? I have a
Mhm.
guy who lost 200 pounds just eating basically beef. He would cook up a bunch of ground beef. He's a single guy. And then he would say, okay, I'll do it with a little salsa one day, and I'll do it with something else one day, and I'll add a little flavor, spices different each day. And he goes, I could do this the rest of my life. It's easy.
Mhm.
And he normalizes diabetes and all this stuff, eating ground beef, basically. It's pretty remarkable what we can accomplish.
Yeah. And then I kind of allowed myself a little more variation and then taught myself how to cook because I'd cooked before, but it was more about like chopping up vegetables and choosing spices and figuring out how to saute it. But like, figuring out what to do with oxtails or, a brisket is, that was a whole different thing. So it allowed me to, not only saving money, allowed me to spend more money in certain areas so that I could be more creative and kind of learn how to cook, a broader number of things. So, at the same time I was saving money, and I then allowed myself to spend a little more on the meat and still, come out ahead and still come out with some savings. So I wouldn't assume that it's going to be too expensive. I mean, if you're trying to eat hot dogs and pepperoni, that is going to be a bad approach to doing carnivore. And, that will be expensive because the more processed and packaged the food is, the greater the costs are ultimately.
Yeah, and the health costs also, all the nitrites and all the stuff that's added in. There's so much stuff that, when they talk about the bad effects of meat, they're usually talking about the more processed stuff. And, a lot of it is hocus pocus, based on, food diaries and all this stuff from the last 20 years. Like anyone knows how many times they ate pizza in the last 20 years, those kind of things. There's a lot of bad science out there that we're basing recommendations on, like the food pyramid, things like that. So your pyramid is very small. Makes it easy too. And the other thing is,
Mhm.
it really does make it easy because, we can grill up a bunch of stuff on Sunday, and you can have it during the week and change it up a little bit. Or, like making eggs doesn't take that long if you're gonna make an omelet or something like that. Or, there's ways to do it even if you're a busy person on a budget, because eggs are really cheap and it's a really good protein source for, for people who need it.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So what's been your biggest surprise doing all this stuff on feedback, or hearing from people that you've helped along the way?
Um, well, it's amazing how many people have just come across my videos. So I, started a YouTube channel to, basically I felt that I wasn't seeing people who look like me, and I wanted to have, I wanted to find other Black people who were doing a carnivore diet, and tell our stories and elevate our voices and make sure that our stories were out there so that other other Black people would look at, might come across this diet and think, oh, this is for me. There are other people like me who are doing this. So I, really, instead of like looking to get experts or whatnot on my channel, I really just found other people who were doing this and talked to them about what they were doing and how it worked, and what were their challenges before, and what is that, and how do they feel now after following this way of eating. And it has been really for me an amazing experience to get to talk to so many different types of people and hear, all the variations of how you might approach a carnivore diet and what works for them. And I think ultimately, I mean, of course, we need scientific studies and research and all of that. But I think if you're not like a science-oriented person, that information is not necessarily appealing to or convincing to, the general population. But if you see your neighbor down the street, the woman at church or somebody at work doing this way of eating and achieving a lot of success, that is much more convincing to most people. So what I wanted to do was really let people like give their testimony and share that, and just make sure it is out there and there is a library of information that can be inspiring and encouraging to anybody who might be watching. So at this point, I guess I would say I have the largest library of African American stories about the carnivore diet. So if you know somebody who you think might be, might benefit from eating this way, or at least hearing about the different, about one really effective way of reversing, various kinds of metabolic disease like diabetes, high blood pressure, and and so on. Or if you want, to share information about obesity, overcoming sugar addiction, dealing with mental health, and overcoming depression, there is an array of things that the people have been able to accomplish by eating this way. And these are all just regular people,
Yeah,
from
that's
all
the
walks
way.
of life.
That's the way. I don't know if you've come across the amazing Triple J.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually talking to him in an hour.
Bro, is that right? Oh
Yes.
yeah, what a great. I was thinking, man, you would love him. He's great. He's a great guy, and
Mhm.
he's accomplishing a lot of great stuff. But him too. He said as soon as he stopped eating donuts and cake, everyone was worried about him. Like, what's wrong with you? Why are you eating like that? Like, no one cared when I was like out of control diabetic. But I think that's something we've known too. Doing low carb MD, we've had all the experts with Noakes and Fetke and all these guys come on, but there's nothing more powerful than someone's testimony and someone saying, look, here's what I did. I gave up all hope, and here's what I did with myself. All the studies in the world will not match that.
Hmm.
The
Yeah,
emotional aspect when you
100%.
connect with someone, you know. So I'm glad you got Triple J on. I'm glad you're doing that. Yeah. No, there's so many
Yeah.
great people out there.
Mostly I focus on people who are doing a carnivore, but I have started to incorporate people who, kind of go back and forth between keto and carnivore, because I think that there's benefit to doing that as well. And I consider all of us part of the family. So, whether you're low carb to carnivore, we're all on a spectrum of, getting the, bringing the carbs down, getting into a state of ketosis. And I think, the carnivore just adds this extra element of really dealing with the autoimmune conditions. And now I my eyes have been opened that autoimmune is more than just like allergies. There are all of these conditions that have inflammation at their base, and or gut imbalances at their base, and to discover, that not only my asthma, allergies, and eczema, but potentially endometriosis, epilepsy, and and anything else might actually be all part of that same package. It's kind of like, oh man,
Yeah, we'll
that
we'll
changes
connect you with some
everything.
people. I want to connect you with some people I think will be really helpful for what you're doing too. And Sabine Hazen comes to mind. She's an expert on the gut microbiome, and she's doing a lot that may answer some questions too that we all have. Because I think a lot of this is going to tie together with the hormone levels and how the hormone levels affect the gut microbiome, and vice versa, and how it affects the brain and what we crave and all those things. So you've done some remarkable stuff. So if people want to track you down, how do they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me. You can go to blackcarnivore.com, and you can see all the different ways to work with me. I've started an online community, which is a great place to get this ongoing support. And we live in a sugar-filled world, so it's like every day is sort of a battle with the onslaught of marketing and pictures and people and food pushers. So you really do need, some place where carnivore is normalized and you can remember that you're not crazy and you're doing the right thing. So I encourage you, find the community that you vibe with people that you like, who, can really give you that support, and stick with it. Like, you really need that. So, I have that, and I do also some coaching, and higher touch programs and some courses. Right now we're finishing up a 5-day carnivore challenge that ends on Saturday, and I'll probably do one again soon, because we are launching into what I call, like, this is the scary season. It begins with Halloween and it doesn't end until January 1st.
Yeah, it's
So
coming.
yeah.
Every year the same thing, and we're all taken
Yeah.
off guard.
Yeah, so I like to start doing more of these types of things in early October, just to kind of help people get through, and even if they fall off track, kind of get restarted, or to stay motivated to, to get through the holiday season. So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
awesome. That's good to think about it now, everyone.
Hmm.
Before it, you
Hmm.
get messed up with 20 extra pounds. You're like, oh, my pants don't fit, and I gotta go back to work.
Yeah.
So for
Sorry
you,
you get to hear that. My dog has asthma as well,
oh,
and she is laying on her back, which always causes her to cough like this.
that's
So
funny. That's funny. It
yeah.
wouldn't be a podcast. We got to have some animal sounds somewhere in there, like just to keep us real. That's all good.
Yeah.
So what's life's best medicine for you? Since this is life's best medicine, what is it that keeps you motivated, or keeps you going, or gives you joy in life? Where do you go when things are tough?
I'm a learner, and I just am so curious about so many things. So I love to just kind of dive into some books, to some podcasts, to learn more, and just try to learn more about how my body works. So that's what's kind of kept me motivated. And then I love to turn around and share it, because I see people suffering, and I just want to turn around and offer my hand to the person behind me and say, hey, this path worked. Let's go. Come on, keep going.
Yeah, it's awesome. And you have to do that. And like Triple J's story, like his friend reached out to him years ago, and he didn't look at the book and didn't do anything. And then it got worse and worse. And then finally he goes, okay, I got to do something. So yeah, being patient, I think, and saying, okay, if you want to do it your way, try that. And if it's not working, come back to me, and we'll try something different. And I think that's really great advice. I think a lot of us, what happens is people go, they'll go paleo, then they go low carb, then they go keto, then they say, oh, I'll try intermittent fasting, then they end up carnivore. It just seems like that's the progression that we're seeing. And I see that enough in my clinic where people say, I feel so much better when I'm just eating meat. Is that okay? Can I just do that? If I feel great. If you're
Yeah.
feeling great, I'm not going to argue with you. Let's see what your numbers look like and keep going, And so it's fun that we all kind of can put our minds together and reach. We really do have to reach different communities, right? The Latino communities and there's a lot of, in the Asian communities are really struggling now with diabetes and obesity and all that. So it's great that we could all, sometimes we want to have to see a face that's similar to ours because, someone else comes in and it just doesn't have the same impact. So that's why it's awesome that you can get in there and go, hey, here's what I'm doing. There's people like us out there and you're not the only one, and normalizing it. And then also building a community. That's what I love. That's what we're doing in our practice too, is building a community where people can get together and help each other and support each other when they're going through a hard time, or if they've been off the wagon, they're not going to get judged, and they can come back and figure out, okay, how do I get back on track?
Mm-hmm.
So one more time, how do people track you down?
So YouTube, Black Carnivore, Instagram @Black Carnivore, and my website, blackcarnivore.com.
All right. Well, awesome. Thanks so much for joining me. It was great spending time with you in San Diego, and hopefully we get to do it again soon. You and I get to wrap a little bit later this afternoon too, so it'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
You get to torture me with questions.
Yes.
All right. Hey, have a great weekend, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.